The rain over New York City fell in relentless silvery sheets, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of gray and neon. From the back of a blacked-out sedan, the city's symphony was muted to a dull, percussive hum on the roof. Inside, however, a storm of a different kind was brewing, silent and devastating. Gwendolyn Astor stared through the tear-streaked window, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy. Across the street, the penthouse of the Ethelgard Tower blazed with light, a beacon of opulence and betrayal. Every flicker of light, every burst of distant laughter was a fresh stab to her heart. This was her husband's 40th birthday party, a party she wasn't invited to, a party for him and for her. Life for Gwendolyn Astor had become a paradox, a beautiful prison crafted from marble glass and unspoken rules. Their Fifth Avenue triplex, a marvel of minimalist architecture curated by the world's most sought-after designers, felt less like a home and more like a museum to a life she was supposed to be living. The vast windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park, but most days they only served to show her a world that was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the sterile silence within her own walls. She had met Jackson Dempsey 5 years ago at a charity gala. He wasn't just wealthy. He was Dempsey Wealth, a name synonymous with global logistics and old-world power. He was charming, intelligent, and possessed a gravitational pull that was impossible to resist. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that felt like a grand romance novel come to life. Gwendolyn, then a promising art historian with a modest background, was swept into his orbit. Their wedding was the society event of the year, a fairy tale meticulously stage-managed by Jackson's formidable mother, Madeline Dempsey. For the first 2 years it was idyllic. They traveled, they laughed, and Jackson seemed genuinely enamored. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the gilding on the cage began to tarnish. Jackson's work became all-consuming. The 12-hour workdays bled into 16-hour ones. Business trips, once a source of exciting reunions, became more frequent and lasted longer. The texts became shorter, the phone calls more perfunctory. He was physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away. Gwendolyn tried to bridge the chasm. She'd wait up for him, wearing the dresses he liked, having his favorite scotch ready. But he would often walk in, loosen his tie with a sigh, give her a peck on the cheek that felt more like a duty than a desire, and retreat into his study with a mountain of paperwork. "Big merger, Gwen." He'd say the words, a familiar shield. "You understand." And she did. Or she tried to. She told herself this was the price of admission to his world. This was the sacrifice required to be the wife of a titan like Jackson Dempsey. Discovering she was pregnant had been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy for Gwendolyn. She had imagined it would be the tether that would pull Jackson back to them. When she told him, he'd smiled a genuine, dazzling smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. He'd held his hand on her still flat stomach and whispered, "An heir, a Dempsey heir." The word heir had pricked at her, a subtle hint that this was more about legacy than love, but she'd pushed the thought away, clinging to the warmth of his embrace. The initial excitement soon faded back into the familiar pattern of absence. In fact, it worsened. He became more guarded with his phone, which was now perpetually silenced, and face down on his nightstand. There was the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his shirts when they came back from the dry cleaners, a subtle exotic fragrance of sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. When she'd asked, he'd waved it away. Probably from a client at the firm. You know how it is, handshakes and meetings all day. The lies were clumsy, almost insulting in their simplicity. The final damning piece of evidence came a week before his 40th birthday. Jackson had told her he was arranging a quiet dinner for them at home. "Just the two of us, Gwen. And the little one," he'd said, tapping her belly. "Before things get crazy with the baby." She had been so relieved, so hopeful. The next day, while searching for a misplaced book in his study, she found an invoice tucked into a portfolio. It wasn't for a quiet dinner. It was from Elysian Events, one of the city's most exclusive party planners. The invoice detailed a lavish celebration for 200 guests at the Ethelgard Tower's private penthouse rooftop, a venue known for its hedonistic parties and stringent privacy. The event was for tonight, his birthday. The client was listed as K. Volkova. The name meant nothing to her. A quick, trembling search on the internet changed everything. Katerina Volkova. A striking, raven-haired woman described in society blogs as an art consultant and socialite. There were photos of her at various international events, often in the background of pictures featuring powerful men. And in one photo taken at Art Basel in Miami 6 months ago, a trip Jackson had supposedly taken alone, he was there standing just behind her. His eyes fixed on her with an intensity Gwendolen hadn't seen directed at herself in years. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet dinner was a lie. Her husband was celebrating his milestone birthday with another woman. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it left her breathless. She didn't confront him. What would be the point? He would lie, gaslight her, and call her hysterical. The Dempsey way, as she'd learned from his mother, was to handle things with cold, clean precision, not messy emotions. So she played the part of the dutiful, unsuspecting wife. This morning she'd given him his birthday gift, a vintage Patek Philippe watch she'd spent months sourcing. He had kissed her, his lips cool, and thanked her, before rushing off to a critical board meeting that couldn't be moved. Now parked in the rain-slicked street, the expensive watch was probably glinting on his wrist as he held another woman's hand. Her driver, a discreet man named Hector, who had been with her for years, sat silently in the front, his eyes fixed forward, offering her the privacy of his feigned ignorance. "Closer, Hector," Gwendolen whispered, her voice hoarse. "Pull up across the street." The car glided forward. The Ethelgard's entrance was a flurry of activity. Valets with black umbrellas rushed to shield arriving guests from the downpour. Women in glittering gowns and men in sharp tuxedos laughed as they disappeared into the golden light of the lobby. It was a world away from the silent, dark interior of her car. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, she could see silhouettes moving against the bright lights. The sound was a faint, thumping bass that vibrated through the very asphalt. She imagined the scene, the clinking of champagne flutes, the pretentious chatter, the air thick with expensive perfume and false congratulations. And then she saw them. The rooftop terrace doors slid open, and a couple stepped out into a covered alcove away from the main crowd. Even from this distance, she knew it was him. The confident set of his shoulders, the way he gestured with his hands as he spoke. And beside him, Katerina Volkova. She was even more stunning in person, a tall, statuesque figure in a crimson dress that seemed poured onto her frame. Her dark hair was slicked back, her profile sharp and aristocratic. Gwendolen's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She watched as Jackson leaned in, his expression animated and joyful in a way she ached for. He was laughing, a full-throated, genuine laugh that she hadn't heard in their silent home for what felt like an eternity. Katerina reached up and adjusted his tie. It was an intimate, familiar gesture that spoke of 1,000 other moments just like it. Then Jackson's hands went to her waist, pulling her closer. Gwendolen felt the air leave her lungs. He was going to kiss her, here in front of the whole world on his birthday. But he didn't. He did something far worse. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gwendolen recognized it instantly. It was from Cartier. A few weeks ago, she had pointed out a stunning diamond necklace in a magazine, a piece called L'Aurore Boreale, a cascade of white and blue diamonds. She had mentioned how beautiful it was, a wistful passing comment. Jackson had smiled vaguely and said nothing. He opened the box. Even from across the street, the diamonds caught the light, exploding in a spray of fire. It was the necklace. He was giving her necklace to another woman. Katerina's gasp was visible. She threw her arms around his neck. Jackson fastened the clasp, his fingers lingering on her skin. He then tilted her chin up, and this time he did kiss her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate kiss, a public declaration under the glittering, indifferent New York skyline. A single hot tear escaped Gwendolen's eye, then another, until they were flowing freely, silent and scalding. Each one was a testament to a broken promise, a shattered dream. The man she had married, the father of her unborn child, was celebrating his life with someone else, adorning her with treasures meant for his wife. In the back of the silent, opulent car, surrounded by the trappings of a life she no longer recognized, Gwendolen Astor finally understood. She wasn't just in a gilded cage. The cage was empty, and she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The storm inside her finally broke, and she wept her quiet sobs, lost to the sound of the rain and the distant mocking music. The drive back to the Fifth Avenue triplex was a blur of smeared city lights and suffocating silence. Each raindrop that slid down the window felt like one of her own tears. When Hector pulled up to the private entrance, he finally broke his professional silence. "Mrs. Dempsey." He said, his voice soft, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right? Should I call someone?" His simple act of kindness was almost her undoing. She shook her head, unable to form words, and fled the car, seeking the cold, empty sanctuary of her home. The triplex, usually a symbol of Jackson's success, now felt like a mausoleum. The cavernous rooms filled with priceless art and designer furniture echoed with the hollowness of her marriage. She walked through the space, her hand trailing along the cold marble countertops and the smooth, impersonal surfaces. Every object was a reminder of him, of the life he had built, a life in which she was apparently just another beautiful, expensive acquisition. She ended up in the nursery. It was the one room she'd had complete control over. It was painted a soft, calming shade of dove grey, with a beautiful hand-painted mural of a gentle woodland scene on one wall. The custom-made crib stood in the corner, empty and waiting. A pile of impossibly small baby clothes sat folded on the changing table. This room had been her hope, her anchor. It was the future. Now it felt like a monument to her naivety. She sank into the plush rocking chair, the one she had imagined spending countless nights in humming lullabies to her child. The sight of Jackson kissing Katerina, of him placing that necklace around her throat, played on a torturous loop in her mind. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the public nature of it, the sheer arrogance. He hadn't just cheated. He had replaced her. He was building a new life, a more exciting one, and she and their unborn child were being relegated to a quiet, inconvenient secret. The sobs she had held back in the car erupted with gut-wrenching force. It was a primal sound of pain, of a heart being systematically torn apart. She curled into a ball in the chair, her body shaking, her hands wrapped around her belly, as if to shield her baby from the poison of his father's betrayal. How could she bring a child into this, into a world built on a foundation of lies? Hours passed. The city outside quieted. The rain softened to a drizzle. Gwendolyn's tears eventually ran dry, leaving behind a cold, desolate clarity. The grief was still there, a leaden weight in her chest. But something else was beginning to stir beneath it: anger, a slow-burning, righteous fury. She had been a good wife. She had supported him, tolerated his absences, and put his needs above her own. She was carrying his child, and this was her reward, to be humiliated and discarded while he celebrated with his mistress. No. She would not be the tragic, weeping wife who faded into obscurity. She would not be a footnote in the biography of Jackson Dempsey. She was Gwendolyn Astor before she met him, and she would be Gwendolyn Astor long after he was a painful memory. The thought, small and fragile at first, began to grow. She had her own strength, her own intelligence. She had just forgotten how to use it, blinded by the dazzling light of his world. Her trembling hand reached for her phone. She scrolled past Jackson's name, past his mother's, past all the society contacts that were his, not hers. Her finger hovered over a single name: Beatrice Chen. Beatrice, or Bea, as she insisted, had been Gwendolyn's best friend since their post-grad days at Columbia. While Gwendolyn had pursued art history, Bea had gone to law school, emerging as a razor-sharp, take-no-prisoners litigator at one of the city's top firms. She had been wary of Jackson from the start, her perceptive eyes seeing the steel beneath his charm. "He collects beautiful things, Gwen." Bea had warned her gently before the wedding. "Just make sure you're not one of them." Gwendolyn hadn't listened. Now Bea's words echoed in the silent nursery with prophetic clarity. She pressed the call button. It was well after 2 a.m., but she knew Bea would answer. "Gwen!" Bea's voice was instantly alert, cutting through the fog of sleep. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "The baby's fine." Gwendolyn choked out her voice, a raw whisper. "It's Jackson." And then it all came pouring out: the late nights, the suspicious perfume, the secret party, the Ethelgard tower, the crimson dress, the other woman, and the necklace. She recounted every soul-crushing detail, her voice breaking with each new confession of his betrayal. Bea listened without interruption. There was no "I told you so," no judgment, just a focused silence on the other end of the line. When Gwendolyn finally finished her story, hanging in the air like toxic smoke, Bea's response was not one of sympathy, but of strategy. "Okay," Bea said, her voice devoid of emotion, replaced by the calm, lethal precision of a lawyer preparing for battle. "First things first, do not confront him. Do not text him. Do not call him. When he comes home, you are asleep. If he wakes you, you have a headache. You are polite, you are distant, but you are not accusatory. Do you understand? We give him nothing." "But Bea..." "No buts. Gwen, you are no longer his wife. You are now an opposing party in a negotiation. From this moment on, every word, every action is calculated. Did you take any pictures tonight?" "Pictures? No, I was just sitting there." "Okay, doesn't matter. We can get street camera footage, security logs. Did he use a credit card you have access to for the party planner, or the necklace?" "The invoice I found was for Kay Volkova. He's probably funding her through a shell account. He's not stupid." Gwendolyn said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "No," Bea agreed. "He's not stupid. He's arrogant, and arrogance leaves a trail. Now I want you to do 2 things. First, try to get some sleep. You need to be clear-headed. Second, meet me tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my office. Not our usual brunch spot. This is business now." "What are we going to do?" Gwendolyn asked the question, sounding small and helpless. Bea's voice dropped, taking on an edge of hard steel that sent a shiver down Gwendolyn's spine. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to protect you and that baby. We are going to methodically and quietly gather every single piece of leverage we can find. We are not just going to divorce him, Gwen. We are going to dismantle him." Hanging up the phone, Gwendolen felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: power. It was a terrifying, unfamiliar sensation. The path forward would be ugly and painful, but for the first time, it was a path of her own choosing. She stood up and walked over to the nursery window, looking out at the waking city. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale grey light over the park. It was a new day. Jackson would come home soon, smelling of champagne, and another woman expecting to find his docile pregnant wife sleeping peacefully. He would find her, but she would not be the same woman he had left yesterday. The shattering was over. Now it was time to pick up the pieces, not to rebuild what she had, but to forge them into a weapon. Beatrice Chen's office was on the 54th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district, a world of polished chrome, smoked glass, and hushed, intimidating efficiency. It was a place where fortunes were made, and empires were brought to their knees through carefully worded clauses and brutal litigation. It was the perfect war room. When Gwendolen arrived, Bea was waiting with 2 cups of black coffee and a plate of pastries that neither of them would touch. Bea looked impeccable, in a sharp navy blue power suit, her demeanor radiating a competence that was immensely calming. "First," Bea said, sliding a folder across the vast mahogany desk, "we need to understand what we're up against." She tapped the folder. "The Dempsey Holdings prenuptial agreement. I went over the copy you sent me last night. It's ironclad as expected. It protects all his premarital assets' inheritance and any growth from those assets. It's designed to give you a comfortable but controlled exit, a one-time settlement and alimony for a few years. It's generous by normal standards, but for a man of his wealth, it's pocket change. It's an insult." "I signed it," Gwendolen said quietly. "I didn't want him to think I was after his money." "Of course you did," Bea said, her tone softening for a moment. "You were in love. They count on that. But there's a morality clause, Article 11, Section B. It voids certain restrictive terms of the settlement in the event of proven marital misconduct leading to public scandal or emotional distress. It's our crowbar. We just need a wall to jam it into." Bea leaned forward, her expression intense. "He thinks you're a piece of art he acquired. Beautiful, quiet, and valuable, but ultimately an object. We need to change his perception. To do that, we need information. Not just about the affair, but about everything." She slid a business card across the desk. It was plain white with a single name and number. "Frank Miller, private investigator. He's old-school, discreet, and relentless. He looks like he walked out of a 1940s detective novel, but he can find a hidden bank account faster than a truffle pig. He's the best. And he's expensive." "I don't care," Gwendolen said, her voice firm. "Whatever it costs." The meeting with Frank Miller took place in a dusty, cluttered office in a less glamorous part of town. The man himself was exactly as Bea had described, late 50s, with a crumpled trench coat, a weary face, and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Gwendolen's story, patiently taking notes in a small, spiral-bound notebook. He asked few questions, but they were sharp and to the point. "The girlfriend's name is Katarina Volkova." He asked, his voice a low grumble. "Yes, she's listed as an art consultant." "Right, that's a popular euphemism," Frank said dryly. "And the party was at the Ethelgard. Good. Their security is tight, but their staff is underpaid. I'll start there. I'll also start a full financial workup on Mr. Dempsey. We're looking for accounts, shell corporations, credit cards, anything that isn't on the official books you'd see. And I'll do a deep dive on Ms. Volkova. You'd be surprised what people leave behind on the internet, even when they try to scrub it. For the next 3 weeks, Gwendolyn lived a strange double life. To Jackson, she was quiet and withdrawn, which she explained away as pregnancy-related fatigue and hormones. He seemed to barely notice, wrapped up in his own world. He was often gone before she woke up and came home, long after she'd gone to bed. The charade was exhausting, but every polite smile, every feigned inquiry about his day was a strategic move, lulling him into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, Frank Miller's reports started coming in. They arrived in plain manila envelopes delivered by courier to B's office. Each one was a small explosion in her carefully constructed reality. The first report confirmed the party. Frank had convinced a catering staff member to provide a sworn affidavit. It detailed the event Jackson Dempsey's 40th birthday, hosted and paid for by Katerina Volkova. Jackson was the guest of honor, and his toast to Katerina was described as incredibly intimate, thanking her for bringing color back into his life. The report included blurry cell phone pictures of them kissing of him, feeding her cake of them dancing. It was sordid and damning. The second report was financial. Frank, with the help of a forensic accountant, had unearthed a labyrinth. Jackson was a master at hiding money. There was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, Argent Stream Holdings, which owned another shell in Delaware, which in turn was used to lease the lavish apartment where Katerina Volkova lived. The same corporation funded a credit card with no spending limit, the one she had used to pay for the party, and Frank confirmed the Cartier necklace. It was a clear, undeniable trail of marital assets being funneled to his mistress. But it was the third report, the one on Katerina Volkova, that changed the game. "This is interesting," Frank had said over a secure phone line. "On the surface, she's clean. Born in St. Petersburg, moved to London for school, then to New York, built a career as a consultant. But her digital footprint is suspiciously sterile. It's too perfect. People have messy pasts, old social media accounts they forget about, embarrassing photos. She has none of that. It's like she was born 10 years ago." Frank had kept digging. He'd gone beyond digital records, pulling international archives, and he found it. Katerina Volkova didn't exist before 2013. Her real name was Anya Petrova. The Petrova family had once been prominent in Russian industrial circles, owning a mid-sized but highly profitable shipping company. Gwendolyn's blood ran cold as she read the next part. In the early 2000s, Dempsey Logistics, under the aggressive leadership of Jackson's father, had orchestrated a hostile takeover of several smaller European competitors. One of them was the Petrova's company. The takeover was brutal and legally dubious. The Petrovas were ruined financially and socially. Anya's father, disgraced and bankrupt, had taken his own life a year later. Anya, then just a teenager, had disappeared with her mother. She changed her name. She reinvented herself. Gwendolyn breathed, staring at the report in B's office. She didn't just reinvent herself. "Gwen," B said, her eyes wide with the implications. "This isn't a simple affair. This isn't a gold digger looking for a benefactor. This is a long con. This is revenge." The pieces clicked into place with terrifying speed. Katerina's meticulous perfection, her targeting of Jackson, the way she had isolated him. She wasn't after his money in the traditional sense. She was positioning herself inside his life, making herself indispensable, likely gaining his trust, perhaps even access to his business secrets. The affair wasn't the goal, it was the weapon. Suddenly the narrative shifted. Jackson wasn't just an adulterer, he was a fool, a powerful, arrogant man being played by a woman whose life his family had destroyed. A new, dangerous idea began to form in Gwendolyn's mind. She had been gathering ammunition for a divorce settlement. But this was something else, entirely. This was a different kind of leverage. Frank found one more thing, B said, pulling out a final sheet of paper. It was a printout of a wire transfer confirmation. Argent Stream Holdings Jackson's secret slush fund made a transfer 2 days ago, $250,000. To Katerina, Gwendolyn asked. No, B said, her voice grim. It was to a man named Declan Monroe. Gwendolyn gasped. Declan Monroe was not just some random name. He was Jackson's fiercest business rival, the CEO of Monroe Atlantic, a competitor who had been chipping away at Dempsey Logistics' market share for years. They hated each other with a vitriol that was legendary in their industry. The betrayal was now a 3-dimensional chess game. Katerina wasn't just seeking personal revenge. She was actively working with Jackson's arch-nemesis. She was feeding information to Monroe, funded by Jackson's own hidden money. This wasn't just marital misconduct anymore. This was corporate espionage. This could ruin him. Gwendolyn looked down at the pile of folders on the desk. The photos, the bank statements, the history of a ruined family. She had started this journey seeking justice for a broken heart. Now she held the key to the potential destruction of the entire Dempsey empire. The question was no longer how she would leave her husband, but how much of his world she would leave intact. The air in the triplex was thick with an unspoken tension. For a week, Gwendolyn had carried her terrible knowledge like a physical weight, moving through her days with a serene, almost chilling calm. She was no longer the grieving wife. She was a general on the eve of a decisive battle. Jackson, oblivious, interpreted her quietude as acceptance, perhaps even a melancholy resignation to the state of their marriage. He was, as B predicted, too arrogant to imagine any other possibility. The confrontation was scheduled with the same precision as a corporate merger. Gwendolyn chose her moment carefully. It was a Sunday evening. Jackson was home, a rare occurrence. He was in his study, a cavernous room, lined with dark wood and leather-bound books, nursing a glass of scotch and reviewing market reports. Gwendolyn walked in without knocking. She was wearing a simple cream-colored cashmere dress that accentuated her pregnancy, a deliberate choice. She wanted him to see everything he was throwing away. She placed a single unmarked manila folder on the polished surface of his antique desk. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Gwen, I'm a bit busy here." "I'm sure you are," she said, her voice even and steady. "But you need to see this." He sighed, the sound of a man tolerating an interruption, and casually flipped open the folder. The first thing he saw was a photograph, a high-resolution image taken with a long lens camera. It was of him and Katerina on the terrace of her apartment, locked in a passionate embrace. It was clearly not from the night of his party. It was from 2 days ago. Jackson's face paled. He slammed the folder shut. "What is this? Are you having me followed? Gwendolyn, this is..." "Beneath me," she finished for him, a cold smile touching her lips. "I agree. But desperation calls for rather undignified measures, wouldn't you say?" He stood up, his posture shifting from relaxed confidence to defensive anger. "This is a private matter. It's complicated." "No, it's not," Gwendolyn said, her voice never rising. She placed a second folder on the desk. "This, for example, is not complicated at all." He opened it. Inside were the incorporating documents for Argent Stream Holdings in the Cayman Islands. Next to them were bank statements, showing millions of dollars flowing through the account, and then a copy of the lease for a penthouse apartment at the Olympic Tower. Lessee Argent Stream Holdings. Authorized occupant Katerina Volkova. Jackson stared at the papers, his jaw tight. The blood had drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" "You're a public figure, Jackson. Your life is a matter of public record if you know where to look. And I hired someone who knows exactly where to look." She let that sink in before placing the third and final folder on the desk. "This one I think will be of particular interest to you." He hesitated, his hand hovering over the folder, as if he knew it contained something far more venomous than the previous two. He finally opened it. The first page was a black and white photo of a family, a man, a woman, and a teenage girl with dark, piercing eyes. Underneath it was a name, the Petrova family. The subsequent pages detailed the hostile takeover of Petrova Shipping by Dempsey Logistics in 2002. It included newspaper clippings about the company's bankruptcy and a short, stark article on the suicide of Andrei Petrova. The final page was a document showing a legal name change, Anya Petrova to Katerina Volkova. Jackson sank back into his chair, his billion-dollar empire and carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He looked at Gwendolyn, and for the first time, she saw not arrogance or anger, but a sliver of genuine fear. Her father," he stammered. "Yes," Gwendolyn said softly. "She doesn't love you, Jackson. She hates you. She hates your family. You weren't a lover to her. You were a project, a means to an end. Every whisper, every touch, every night you spent with her was an act of revenge for what your father did to hers." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Jackson looked like a man who had been stabbed the wound, invisible but mortal. His affair wasn't a passionate indiscretion. It was a symptom of his own monumental foolishness. He had been played expertly and ruthlessly. Before he could respond, the study doors opened. Madeline Dempsey stood there, her presence as cold and imposing as ever. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in its usual immaculate coif. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, her son pale and defeated, her daughter-in-law pregnant and radiating an unnerving strength, the open folders on the desk. "I was just leaving," Madeline said, her voice like chipping ice, though it was clear she had just arrived and likely been listening from the hall. "But it seems there's a family matter to attend to." She walked to the desk, her gaze sweeping over the documents. She showed no surprise, no shock. Her expression was one of grim, calculated assessment, like a CEO reviewing a disastrous quarterly report. She looked at Jackson with undisguised contempt. "I warned you about her. I had her vetted. The background was too polished. You in your infinite wisdom told me it was none of my business." She then turned her gaze to Gwendolyn. It was not a warm look, but there was a flicker of something new in it, respect. The kind of respect one predator affords another. "And you," Madeline said. "You've been busy." "I've been protecting myself," Gwendolyn replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And my child." Madeline picked up the folder on Katerina. "This is a significant problem, a vendetta. It compromises you, Jackson. It compromises the company." "I'll handle it," Jackson mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "I'll cut her off." "It's too late for that," Gwendolyn said, her voice cutting through his pathetic attempt to regain control. She slid one final piece of paper out from her sleeve. It was the wire transfer confirmation. "She's not just getting revenge, Jackson. She's getting paid for it." She pushed the paper towards him. He stared at the names. Argent Stream Holdings, Declan Monroe, $250,000. The implication hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair. This was no longer a personal betrayal. This was treason. He had been sleeping with a corporate spy, funded her with his own money, and she was funneling information to his greatest enemy. He hadn't just been unfaithful to his wife. He had been unfaithful to his legacy, to the Dempsey name itself. Madeline snatched the paper, her eyes narrowing as she read it. The mask of icy composure finally cracked, revealing a flash of pure fury. She looked at her son as if he were a complete and utter stranger, a liability that needed to be managed. "You fool!" She whispered the words carrying more venom than a shout. "You catastrophic fool!" The power in the room had shifted entirely. It no longer belonged to Jackson the billionaire titan, or even Madeline the matriarch. It rested in the hands of the pregnant, silent woman they had both so grievously underestimated. Gwendolen stood there, a quiet vessel of their destruction, holding all the cards. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't cried, she hadn't made a scene. She had simply presented the truth, and the truth was more devastating than any emotional outburst could ever be. The war was over before they even knew they were fighting it. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was a study in controlled chaos. Madeline Dempsey, recovering from her momentary shock, took command with the ruthless efficiency of a field marshal. Her first act was to dismiss her son from his own study with a contemptuous wave of her hand. "Go upstairs, Jackson. Pour yourself a drink. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch your phone. Try for once in your life to do nothing." Jackson, looking hollowed out and years older, obeyed without a word, a deposed king shuffling away from his throne. When he was gone, Madeline turned to Gwendolen. The room, which had felt charged with explosive energy, became intensely quiet. It was just the two of them, the matriarch and the heiress, apparent two women on opposite sides of a chasm of betrayal. "You have been far more resourceful than I gave you credit for," Madeline began, her voice a low, clinical monotone. She gestured to the folders. "You've done your homework. So what is it you want? A bigger settlement. Public humiliation, blood. What I want." Gwendolen said, her voice level, "is a future for my child. A future that is stable and secure and free from the toxicity and lies of this family." "A noble sentiment," Madeleine said with a dismissive air. "But we live in a practical world. This information in the wrong hands. Declan Monroe could use this to trigger a shareholder revolt. The corporate espionage charge alone could lead to a federal investigation. This goes far beyond a messy divorce." She paused, her eyes locking onto Gwendolen's. "You hold a gun to the head of this entire company. So I ask you again, what is your price?" Gwendolen had rehearsed this moment with Bea for hours. She knew her lines. She knew her demands. But looking at this cold, calculating woman, she felt a sudden, powerful impulse to go off script. The game was more complex than she'd realized. "Before we discuss my price," Gwendolen said, walking slowly towards the vast window overlooking the park, "I think there's something you're missing. You think Katerina Anya Petrova is simply working for Declan Monroe. That this is a straightforward case of corporate espionage for money and revenge." Madeleine raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And you believe there's more?" "I know there is," Gwendolen said, turning back to face her. "Frank Miller, my investigator, he kept digging. He's a very thorough man. He found it odd that Declan Monroe, a man known for his meticulous planning, would use someone as emotionally compromised as Anya. A revenge mission is unpredictable. Monroe doesn't like unpredictable variables." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. So Frank looked into the connection between them, and he found a third party, a broker, someone who connected Anya to Monroe, who helped facilitate the entire arrangement. A flicker of unease crossed Madeleine's face. This was new information. This was a piece she didn't have. "Who?" Gwendolen walked back to the desk. She reached into a clutch which she had placed on a nearby chair and pulled out another much thinner file. She opened it and took out a single sheet of paper. It was a photograph. It showed two people sitting at a small, discreet cafe in Guinevere. One was Declan Monroe. The other was a man Gwendolen didn't recognize at first. He was older, distinguished, with a familiar air of quiet authority. Frank had to pull a lot of strings to get this. Gwendolen said, her voice barely a whisper. Taken 3 years ago, long before Jackson even met Katerina. She slid the photo across the desk to Madeline. Madeline picked it up. She stared at it, her face slowly losing all its color. Her manicured hand began to tremble ever so slightly. Gwendolen delivered the final devastating blow. You know who that is, don't you? It's Lawrence Croft, your head of European acquisitions for 20 years, your husband's most trusted lieutenant, the man who orchestrated the Petrova takeover for your family back in 2002. Madeline looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. It was Croft who found Anya Petrova. Gwendolen continued pressing her advantage. It was Croft who knew her history, her potential as a weapon. And it was Croft, your loyal man, who brokered the deal to deliver her to Declan Monroe. And do you know why? Because 5 years ago, when your husband passed away, Jackson decided Croft was part of the old guard. He forced him into early retirement, humiliated him, threw away 20 years of loyalty without a second thought. The carefully constructed world of Madeline Dempsey shattered. The betrayal was not external. It was internal. The enemy was not just at the gates. He had been inside the castle walls for decades. This wasn't just Jackson's affair. This wasn't just Anya's revenge or Declan's corporate raiding. This was a rot that started within their own organization, a ghost of their own past business practices coming back to haunt them, orchestrated by one of their own. Katerina wasn't the mastermind. Declan Monroe wasn't the sole instigator. They were both pieces in a much larger game of revenge, one initiated by a man the Dempseys themselves had created and then discarded. "My God," Madeline whispered, sinking into the chair Jackson had just vacated. For the first time, Gwendolen saw her not as a powerful matriarch, but as an old woman surveying the ruins of her legacy. The sins of the father, the sins of the son, and the sins of their most loyal servant had all converged into this single catastrophic moment. "So you see, Madeline," Gwendolen said, her voice now filled with an icy finality, "this is far bigger than you imagined. Declan Monroe has an insider's roadmap to your company's weaknesses provided by your own former executive. He has a weapon in your son's bed. And she tapped the folders on the desk, have the proof of all of it. She let the full weight of the situation settle upon the older woman. We are no longer negotiating the terms of a divorce settlement. We are negotiating the survival of Dempsey Logistics, and I am now your most important business partner. The twist wasn't just that the Mistress was a spy. The twist was that the entire conspiracy was an inside job, a blowback from the Dempseys' own ruthless history. Gwendolen had thought she was holding a gun. She now realized she was holding the detonator to a bomb that had been planted under the Dempsey empire years ago, and she was the only one who could decide whether or not to push the button. In the days that followed, the Fifth Avenue triplex became a corporate crisis center, disguised as a luxury home. Madeline, stripped of her arrogance and galvanized by the threat to her family's legacy, worked with a terrifying focus. Jackson was a ghost in his own house, sidelined, and broken, his authority completely usurped by his mother and the wife he had betrayed. He was made to understand in no uncertain terms by Madeline that his only role was to remain silent and do exactly as he was told. The negotiations did not take place over a boardroom table, but in the sterile, art-filled living room. It was Gwendolen with B. Chen at her side against Madeline, and a team of the most ruthless lawyers in New York. Let's be clear about the terms. B started her voice, cutting through the tension. Gwendolen is not interested in a hostile takeover or a public scandal. A scandal hurts the company's stock, which in turn hurts the value of her child's future inheritance. We are all, for better or worse, invested in the continued stability of Dempsey Logistics. Madeline nodded, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. This was language she understood. Therefore, B continued, the evidence my client has gathered regarding the affair, the corporate espionage, and Mr. Croft's involvement will be placed in a secure, encrypted digital vault. The access keys will be held in escrow, to be released only under specific conditions. What conditions? Madeline asked, her voice tight. Gwendolen spoke for the first time, her gaze fixed on Madeline. First, Jackson will step down as CEO, effective immediately. He can retain his seat on the board and his shares, but his operational control is over. The board will be told it's for personal health reasons. You, Madeline, will resume the role of interim CEO until a suitable replacement is found. Your son is a liability. He has proven that. Jackson, sitting on a couch across the room, flinched as if struck but said nothing. His mother didn't even look at him. She just gave a curt nod. Done. Second. Gwendolen went on. The prenuptial agreement is void. It will be replaced by a new post-nuptial agreement. I will not be taking a lump sum payout. Instead, a trust will be established for our child. A trust that cannot be altered or accessed by anyone but a neutral third-party trustee until the child is 25. Into that trust, Jackson will place 20% of his personal shares in Dempsey Logistics, not their cash value, the shares themselves. My child's future will be tied directly to the future of this company. One of Madeline's lawyers started to protest, but she silenced him with a glance. 20% was an immense fortune, a significant portion of Jackson's personal holdings. But it was a brilliant move. It ensured Gwendolen's silence by making her child one of the largest individual shareholders. Their interests were now permanently aligned. Agreed. Madeline said the word, tasting like ash. Third. Gwendolen said, her voice softening slightly. I want the house, this apartment. The title will be transferred to my name, free and clear. I will raise my child here. It's the only home he or she will have ever known, and I won't have their life disrupted because of their father's mistakes. This, for some reason, seemed to hit Madeline the hardest. The triplex was the family's crown jewel, but she knew she had no choice. She nodded again. Finally, Gwendolen said, standing up, I want him gone. Jackson will move out. He can see his child, but by appointment, and not in this home for the first year. There will be no divorce filed. We will remain legally married. A public divorce now on the heels of his health-related departure would raise too many questions. We will be separated quietly and permanently. For the sake of the company, we will maintain the illusion of a family. For the sake of my sanity, he will not be a part of my life. The terms were brutal, but surgically precise. She wasn't destroying the family. She was seizing control of it. She was exiling her husband from his own life, taking his home a significant portion of his wealth for their child, and effectively ending his career. She was doing it all without a single headline in the gossip columns. As for the external threats, Madeline handled them with the cold precision she was known for. Lawrence Croft was visited by Madeline's lawyers. Presented with the evidence against him, the disgraced executive disappeared. His severance package revoked his reputation intact, but his power utterly neutralized. Katerina Volkova or Anya Petrova received a similar unannounced visit. She was shown the files detailing her real identity and her conspiracy. She was offered a simple choice: disappear forever, with a one-way ticket back to Europe, and a small, untraceable settlement to ensure she never returned or faced charges of fraud and corporate espionage that would land her in a federal prison. She chose the ticket. Her revenge, so meticulously planned, had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, ignominious retreat. Declan Munro found his source of information suddenly dry up. Without the insider intelligence from Croft and Katerina, his strategic advantage vanished. He would never know how close he came to toppling the Dempsey giant. 2 months later, Gwendolen gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom she named Spencer. Spencer Astor Dempsey. He had his father's eyes, but Gwendolen was determined he would have his mother's strength. The final scene of the drama took place not in the tense living room, but in the quiet nursery. Gwendolen was rocking Spencer, humming a soft lullaby. Jackson stood in the doorway, a stranger in the home he once owned. He had come for one of his scheduled supervised visits. He looked diminished, a man hollowed out by his own failures. "He's beautiful, Gwen," Jackson whispered. "Yes, he is," she replied, not looking at him. I'm sorry." He said the word sounding inadequate, pathetic. "For everything." Gwendolen finally looked up at him, her expression not of anger or hate, but of a profound and weary pity. "Don't be sorry, Jackson. Just be better. For him." She turned her attention back to her son, the center of her new world. Jackson stood in the doorway for a long moment, an exile looking in at the life he had forfeited. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall. Gwendolen Astor had walked into this marriage as a naive art historian and had been treated like a decorative object. She now sat as the undisputed queen of her own domain, the guardian of a significant fortune, and the mother of the future of the Dempsey legacy. She had not set out to win a war only to survive a betrayal, but in doing so, she had learned the language of power and had rewritten the rules of the gilded cage, transforming it from a prison into a fortress. Her son would grow up not knowing the sordid details of his parents' story, but he would be raised by a woman who had faced down an empire and emerged not just intact, but in control. So what begins as a story of heartbreaking betrayal transforms into an incredible saga of resilience and empowerment. Gwendolen's journey from a weeping wife outside a skyscraper to the quiet, unassailable power within it serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the absence of pain, but about what we choose to build from the wreckage. She didn't just get even. She got everything, but on her own terms, securing a future for the one innocent person in the entire affair, her child. Her story shows that sometimes the most devastating blows can reveal a strength we never knew we had. If Gwendolen's incredible story of transformation and strategic victory moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a story of strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening. He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was his elegant, intelligent wife, the silent architect of his empire. But in the glittering, hollow world of New York's elite, loyalty is a commodity, and respect is a luxury not everyone can afford. One fateful night, at the city's most prestigious charity gala, under the watchful eyes of the powerful and the privileged, he made a choice. To appease his new flame, a woman draped in diamonds and ambition, he raised his hand to the wife who had built him. A single, sharp slap that echoed louder than the orchestra. He thought it was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end, because while he slept soundly that night, she was igniting a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The Starlight Charity Gala was the apex of the Manhattan social calendar, a glittering spectacle held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. To the outside world, Damien and Catherine Blackwood were the evening's reigning couple. He, the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd built from the ground up, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a cold, calculating blue, and his smile a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. Catherine, his wife of 10 years, was his perfect counterpart, or so it seemed. Graceful and poised, with intelligent hazel eyes that saw far more than they let on, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for meekness. She wore an emerald silk gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had been the first investor in Damien's dream, not with money, but with intellect. Her Wharton MBA and razor-sharp strategic mind had transformed his raw coding talent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had drafted the business plans, navigated the early-stage funding rounds, and architected the corporate structure. He was the face. She was the foundation. A foundation he had begun to treat as little more than pavement to be trod upon. The source of that disrespect was currently clinging to his arm, a vibrant slash of crimson in the muted elegance of the ballroom. Her name was Serafina Munro, a model-turned-influencer whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as the stilettos on her feet. She laughed a little too loudly, her scarlet lips perpetually curved in a predatory smile. She was everything Catherine was not, ostentatious, demanding, and utterly transparent in her desires. And Damien, a man terrified of losing the status he'd fought so ruthlessly to attain, was utterly captivated by her public performance of adoration. "Darling," Serafina purred, her fingers tracing the lapel of Damien's Tom Ford tuxedo. "Mr. Abernathy from the Times is watching us. We should give him something to write about." She tilted her head towards a corner where several high-profile investors, including the notoriously shrewd Robert Chen of Chen Capital, were in conversation. "Go on, Damien. Remind them who the king of this city is." Damien's chest puffed out. He thrived on such validation. Catherine watched, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. She saw the subtle way he preened under Serafina's gaze, the way he subtly angled his body away from her, his own wife, as if she were a relic of a past he was eager to shed. "In a moment, my dear," Damien said, his eyes scanning the room. "First, I need to ensure everything is perfect." His gaze fell on Catherine. "Catherine, did you confirm the seating arrangement with the event planner? I specifically said I wanted to be at the same table as Senator Thompson." "Yes, Damien," Catherine replied, her voice calm and even, betraying none of her inner turmoil. "We are at table 1, with the Senator and Mrs. Thompson, as you requested. I confirmed it myself an hour ago." Serafina let out a small, condescending laugh. "Always so efficient, aren't we? Like a perfect little assistant." The barb struck its target. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Serafina the satisfaction of a reaction. Damien, however, either missed the malice or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on his own performance. For the next hour, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She engaged in polite conversation about art auctions and summering in the Hamptons. She deflected intrusive questions about Damien's latest, rumored acquisition with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. All the while, she was acutely aware of Damien and Serafina, a garish duo moving through the crowd. She saw him whisper in Serafina's ear, saw the possessive hand he placed on the small of her back, a public declaration for all to see. The tension finally snapped later in the evening, near the marbled archway leading to the terrace. Catherine had been speaking with Marcus Thorne, the COO of Blackwood Innovations, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of her contributions to the company. "The quarterly projections are looking aggressive, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice low. "Damien is pushing the R&D department to its limits. I'm worried we're heading for a bubble." "I've seen the data, Marcus," she said quietly. "He's chasing headlines, not sustainable growth. I've warned him." "He doesn't listen to anyone anymore," Marcus lamented, his gaze flicking nervously towards Damien, who was approaching them with Serafina in tow. "What are you two whispering about?" Damien's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "Just discussing the quarterly numbers, Damien," Marcus said quickly. Serafina slid her arm around Damien's waist. "Don't let them bore you with business, darling. It's a party." She then looked directly at Catherine, her eyes glittering with malice. "You know, Catherine, you should really try to enjoy yourself. You look so tense. It adds years to your face." Catherine met her gaze, her composure unwavering. "Thank you for your concern, Serafina. But I find that worrying about the health of a $10 billion company is a more productive use of my time than worrying about a few wrinkles." The comeback was swift, precise, and it hit its mark. A flicker of fury crossed Serafina's perfectly made-up face. She turned to Damien, her lower lip trembling theatrically. "Damien, did you hear that? She's insulting me. She's always so cold, so superior." Damien's face darkened. In his mind, Catherine's sharp intellect, once his greatest asset, had become a threat. Her quiet competence felt like a judgment on his loud insecurities. Serafina's manufactured vulnerability was a balm to his fragile ego. He looked from Serafina's pouting face to Catherine's calm, unreadable expression. In front of Marcus, in front of anyone who might be watching from the periphery, he needed to assert his authority. He needed to prove who held the power. "Apologize to her, Catherine," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Catherine's blood ran cold. "I will not. I have nothing to apologize for." I said, "Apologize." "No, Damien." It was her quiet defiance that broke him. It was the fact that she wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid. To him it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He saw Serafina looking at him, her eyes wide, waiting. He felt the phantom eyes of the entire New York elite upon him. In that single, terrible moment, his vanity and his cruelty won. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap was sharp, a brutal crack that cut through the murmur of the gala. Catherine's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on her cheek like a hot, poisonous flower. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus Thorne froze, his face a mask of horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a pocket of stunned disbelief in the heart of the opulent ballroom. Catherine slowly turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. She looked at Damien, not as her husband, but as a stranger, an enemy. She saw the flicker of shock in his own eyes, as if his hand had acted of its own accord, quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive glare. She looked at Serafina, who had the decency to look momentarily stunned before a flicker of triumph settled in her eyes. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. Her back was straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her away from the wreckage of her marriage, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces, and out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air. Damien watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance. He turned to a shaken Serafina and forced a smile. "Now, where were we?" he asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. He had no idea that the sound of that slap was not an ending, but the starting pistol for a war he was utterly unprepared to fight. The taxi ride from the Pierre to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of city lights smearing against the cold glass. Catherine sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed against the lingering, phantom heat on her cheek. The sting had subsided, replaced by a profound and chilling numbness. It was the numbness of a limb that has been severed, the shock preceding the agony. She felt strangely disconnected from the woman in the emerald gown, the woman who had just been publicly humiliated by her own husband. That woman was a character she had played for a decade. Tonight, the performance had ended. When the taxi pulled up to the imposing limestone facade of their building, the doorman, a kind-faced man named George, rushed to open her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood. You're home early." His eyes widened slightly as he saw her face, the faint red mark just beginning to bloom on her cheekbone. To his credit, his professional mask didn't slip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, George. Thank you," she said, her voice a monotone. But as she walked across the marble lobby, she knew nothing would ever be fine again. The private elevator opened directly into their penthouse. It was a monument to Damien's success, a sprawling space of glass, chrome, and minimalist furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and curated for magazine spreads. It had never felt like a home. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, her heels clicking an unnervingly loud rhythm on the polished concrete floors. She didn't cry. The time for tears felt 1,000 miles away. What she felt instead was a slow, creeping rage, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a wounded animal. It was the focused, calculating fury of a grandmaster whose opponent has just made a fatal, unforgivable blunder. The slap wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst. It was the physical manifestation of 1,000 smaller betrayals, 1,000,000 moments of being diminished, ignored, and taken for granted. It was the culmination of every time he had taken credit for her ideas, dismissed her concerns as nagging, and paraded his affairs as trophies of his masculine prowess. He hadn't just struck her, he had tried to erase her. She walked into their shared walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. On one side were Damien's meticulously organized rows of designer suits and shoes. On the other, her own collection of elegant, understated pieces. She ignored them all. She went to the back, to a locked safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. She keyed in the code, not their anniversary, not his birthday, but the date she had finalized the patent for the core algorithm that had launched Blackwood Innovations. An algorithm she had written. Inside the safe were her personal documents, some jewelry, and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. She took only the hard drive and a single, slim folio of documents. She then walked into the master bedroom and took a small, leather-bound journal from her nightstand. It was filled with her handwriting, notes, ideas, and strategic plans for the company, many of which Damien had later presented as his own. She didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. That was what a fleeing victim did. She was not a victim. She was a combatant preparing for battle. She took only a single, expensive-looking leather duffel bag. Into it, she placed the hard drive, the journal, the folio, her laptop, and a toiletry bag with only the essentials. The emerald gown she was wearing felt like a costume from another life. She stripped it off, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She changed into a simple, severe black pantsuit, a crisp white silk blouse, and practical, low-heeled Chanel pumps. It was armor. Her phone buzzed. It was Damien. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Texts began to pour in. "Catherine, where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting." The final one, sent minutes later, was the most telling. "Don't do anything stupid. Think of the company's reputation." His reputation. Not her pain, not their marriage. The company, the entity she had built. A bitter smile touched her lips. Oh, she was thinking of the company. She was thinking of it very, very carefully. She made one phone call. Jessica Riley, a sharp, alert voice, answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Jessica was her oldest friend, a shark of a divorce lawyer from the prestigious firm of Cromwell, Stern and Vance. The Vance was her father. "Jess, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? I heard what happened at the gala. My colleague David was there. He called me." "Are you okay?" "He slapped me, Jess. In public." Catherine's voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice turned to steel. "Where are you?" "At the penthouse. I'm leaving now." "Good. Don't engage with him. Don't answer his calls. Where are you going?" "I've booked a suite at the Carlyle, under my maiden name." Vance. The name felt good on her tongue. It was her own. "Okay. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. We'll start the paperwork." "No," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about divorce papers. Not yet. That's a skirmish. I'm planning a war." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing. She knew Catherine better than anyone. She knew her friend's calm exterior hid a formidable intellect and an iron will. "Okay," she said slowly. "What's the first move?" "I'm going to need you to look over a non-disclosure agreement. A very, very restrictive one. And I need to get in touch with an old acquaintance. I need you to find the best way to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. An urgent one." She took a deep breath. "The name is Alexander Sterling, of Sterling Capital." Jessica let out a low whistle. Alexander Sterling was a legend on Wall Street, a so-called vulture capitalist to his enemies, a visionary investor to his allies. His firm was known for aggressive, often hostile, takeovers of undervalued or poorly managed tech companies. They were also Blackwood Innovation's most feared competitor. "Sterling," Jessica said, her voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Kat, what are you planning?" "Damien thinks the company is his greatest strength," Catherine said, walking towards the elevator, her duffel bag in hand. "He's about to find out that it's his greatest vulnerability. And I know where all the cracks are. After all, I'm the one who papered over them." She ended the call, stepped into the elevator, and descended from the glass tower for the last time. As the door slid shut, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. The woman staring back at her was not the broken wife of Damien Blackwood. It was Catherine Vance, and she was ready to reclaim everything he had taken from her, and more. The shattering was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The Carlyle Hotel, with its old-world elegance and discreet service, was a world away from the cold modernity of Damien's penthouse. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, the perfect staging ground for what was to come. Catherine's suite, registered under the name Vance, was opulent but comforting, with heavy silk curtains and classic furniture that seemed to absorb the sounds and chaos of the city outside. She didn't sleep. Fueled by adrenaline and 2 decades of suppressed ambition, she worked through the night. Her laptop was open, the encrypted hard drive connected. On the screen were the unvarnished truths of Blackwood Innovations, not the polished PR-spun versions presented to shareholders, but the raw data, suppressed R&D failures, over-leveraged acquisitions, and most damningly, a series of creative accounting practices Damien had insisted upon to inflate their quarterly earnings. Catherine had argued against them, warning that they were a house of cards. Now she was grateful for his arrogance. He had handed her the very wind she needed to blow it all down. Beside the laptop lay her leather-bound journal. She methodically cross-referenced her handwritten notes, strategic plans, market analysis, software architecture ideas, with the company's official development roadmaps. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of key innovations, patents and strategic partnerships that Damien had publicly claimed as his own vision had originated in detail from her private notes. She had been the ghost in his machine, the architect of his throne. At 7 a.m. Jessica arrived, looking sharp and alert in a navy blue suit. She carried a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Catherine, her eyes scanning her friend's face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury for peacetime, Jess," Catherine replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Did you make the call?" Jessica nodded, setting her briefcase on the mahogany desk. "It wasn't easy. Alexander Sterling's schedule is locked down tighter than Fort Knox, but the name Vance, coupled with urgent, time-sensitive intelligence on Blackwood Innovations, got his attention. He's cleared his calendar. We have a meeting at his office, 10 a.m. sharp." "Good," Catherine said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "That gives us time to prepare the presentation." "Kat, are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her professional caution warring with her personal loyalty. "Going to Sterling. It's like handing a starving wolf the keys to the henhouse. Once you let him in, you can't control what he does." "I'm not looking for control, Jess. I'm looking for a wrecking ball," Catherine stated coldly. "Damien respects only one thing: power, financial power. I'm going to bring a power to his door, so overwhelming that he'll have no choice but to bow. Alexander Sterling is not a partner. He is a weapon." She turned the laptop screen towards Jessica. For the next 2 hours, Catherine walked her friend through the vulnerabilities of Blackwood Innovations. She spoke with a passion and authority Jessica hadn't seen in years. This was the Catherine from Wharton, the brilliant strategist who could dissect a balance sheet like a surgeon. She explained how Damien's aggressive push into volatile markets had left the company dangerously exposed, how the inflated profit margins were hiding a growing debt crisis, and how their most recent flagship product, the Prometheus AI, was built on a flawed and unstable code base, a shortcut Damien had demanded against her explicit advice. "He's running a multi-billion-dollar company like a gambler on a hot streak," Catherine concluded, her voice steely. "But the streak is about to end, and I have the data to prove it." At 9:30 a.m. they left the Carlisle. Catherine wore the same black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. The faint bruise on her cheek was visible, unconcealed by makeup. It was not a mark of shame. It was a testament, a piece of evidence. Sterling Capital was located in a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass needle aimed at the heavens. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and hushed reverence. They were escorted to the top floor, to Alexander Sterling's private office. The man himself was waiting. Alexander Sterling was in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the antithesis of Damien. Where Damien was loud, Sterling was quiet. Where Damien wore his wealth like a costume, Sterling wore his bespoke suit with an air of complete, unstudied indifference. He radiated a calm, predatory confidence that was far more intimidating than Damien's bluster. He did not smile as they entered. He simply watched, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chairs opposite his vast, uncluttered desk. "Your lawyer's message was intriguing." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the mark on her cheek, but his expression remained impassive. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I believe I have information that will be of significant value to you and your firm." She didn't wait for permission. She placed her laptop on the desk, opened it, and began. She didn't speak of her marriage, of the gala, of the slap. She spoke the language he understood: numbers, data, and strategy. She laid bare the weaknesses of Blackwood Innovations with clinical precision. She presented the inflated earnings reports next to the real, grim figures from her hard drive. She detailed the structural flaws in the Prometheus AI, predicting a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months that would trigger a massive stock devaluation. Finally, she brought up her masterstroke. Damien is currently in final negotiations to acquire a smaller AI firm, Cygnus AI, for $2 billion, she explained, displaying the confidential deal memo she had downloaded. He sees it as a vanity project, but my analysis shows that Cygnus AI's patent portfolio, when combined with Blackwood's existing infrastructure, doesn't create synergy. It creates a redundancy that will cost $500 million in restructuring alone. He is paying a premium for a company whose core technology will be obsolete within 18 months. He is hemorrhaging capital for ego. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. He had not interrupted her once. He had simply listened, his sharp eyes following every chart, every projection. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "You're suggesting Blackwood is a house of cards." "I'm stating it as a fact," Catherine corrected him gently. "And I'm offering you the opportunity to be the one holding the fan when it comes time to blow." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his gaze analytical, searching. "Why come to me? You're his wife. A messy divorce. You could take him for half. Why burn the whole kingdom down?" For the first time, Catherine allowed a flicker of personal history to enter her voice. "Because I helped build that kingdom, Mr. Sterling, and my name is not on a single brick. Damien Blackwood believes he is the sole architect. He has forgotten the importance of a strong foundation. I am not here for alimony. I'm not here for a settlement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "I am here for equity. I will provide you with the blueprint to acquire his company at a fraction of its current market value. In return, when Sterling Capital takes control, I want a senior executive position, a seat on the new board, and a significant stake in the restructured company. I am not selling my revenge, Mr. Sterling. I am leveraging my intellectual property." Alexander Sterling looked at her, and for the first time, a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. He wasn't looking at a scorned wife. He was looking at his next, and perhaps most brilliant, business partner. "Ms. Vance," he said, extending a hand across the desk, "I believe we have a deal." Damien Blackwood arrived at the headquarters of Blackwood Innovations at 9 a.m., feeling triumphant. The night had been a blur of champagne and fawning admirers after Catherine's dramatic exit. Serafina had been suitably impressed by his show of strength, and her flattery had soothed his bruised ego. He'd woken up that morning with a mild hangover and a sense of righteous indignation. Catherine's disobedience had been a public embarrassment, but he had handled it. He had put her in her place. He expected she was holed up in some hotel, crying, ready to come crawling back with a tearful apology. He'd make her sweat for a day or two before graciously allowing her to return. He strode through the gleaming lobby, nodding curtly at the employees who scurried out of his way. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," they'd murmur. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Clara, met him at his office door. "Good morning, sir. The board members are assembling for the 10 a.m. emergency meeting you called." "Excellent," Damien said, tossing his coat onto a chair. He'd called the meeting to fast-track the Cygnus AI acquisition, a move that would splash his face across every business journal. It was the perfect way to bury the gossip from last night's gala under a headline of corporate conquest. "Any messages?" "Your wife's lawyer called, sir. Jessica Riley," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "She said to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that Ms. Vance, would be attending the board meeting." Damien laughed, a short, sharp bark. "What? Is she coming to apologize in front of the board? A little dramatic, even for her." He dismissed the thought. She was probably bluffing, trying to rattle him. Fine, let her come. It will be educational for her. At precisely 10 a.m., Damien entered the boardroom on the 50th floor. The room was designed to intimidate, with a long, black granite table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. His board was assembled, a collection of stern, grey-haired men he'd carefully selected for their pliability. Marcus Thorne, the COO, sat among them, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Damien's eye. "Good morning, gentlemen," Damien began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I've called you here today to finalize our acquisition of—" The boardroom doors swung open. Damien stopped mid-sentence, an annoyed frown forming on his face. And then he saw her. Catherine stood in the doorway. She was not the woman he had slapped last night. This was a different person entirely. Dressed in her severe black suit, her face composed and resolute, she radiated an aura of unshakable power. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, silent accusation. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Alexander Sterling. A wave of confusion and alarm rippled through the boardroom. Alexander Sterling was their rival, their boogeyman, the shark that circled their waters. His presence here was inexplicable, a violation of the natural order. "Catherine?" Damien stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Good morning, Damien." "Gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady as she walked into the room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's attention. Alexander Sterling stood slightly behind her, a silent, imposing presence. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here today not as your wife, Damien, but as a representative of a new business proposal. Mr. Sterling is here as my associate." Damien gaped at her. "Business proposal? What are you talking about? This is a private board meeting." "It's about to become a very public one if you don't listen," Catherine said calmly. She nodded to Jessica Riley, who had followed them in, and began handing a thick, bound document to each board member. "Please take a look at the portfolio in front of you. It's an offer from Sterling Capital." The board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue, began to flip through the pages. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Damien stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. An offer? An offer for what? This is absurd. Security, get them out of here. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackwood. Alexander Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. Because the document your board is currently reading is a preliminary, but very generous, tender offer to acquire a controlling interest in Blackwood Innovations. The blood drained from Damien's face. Acquire? You can't. Our stock is at an all-time high. Our valuation is a fantasy, Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. And that is why I am here. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine systematically and dispassionately dismantled the company she had helped build. She projected charts and figures onto the room's main screen from her laptop. She exposed the creative accounting, the hidden debt, the precarious market position. She walked them through the technical flaws of the Prometheus AI, predicting its inevitable and costly failure. Her delivery was flawless, her command of the facts absolute. The board members stared, mesmerized and horrified, as the woman they had only ever known as the CEO's quiet, pretty wife revealed herself to be the true master of their company's universe. And finally, Catherine said, her gaze locking onto Damien's, the Cygnus AI acquisition. She displayed the internal memo on the screen. A $2 billion vanity project that will indebt this company for a decade to acquire redundant technology. An act of such profound fiscal irresponsibility that it borders on corporate malfeasance. Robert Chen, the investor who had been present at the gala, looked up from the portfolio, his face grim. The offer from Sterling Capital is 30% above current market value. Given the irregularities Ms. Vance has just presented, this isn't just a generous offer. It's a lifeline. This is ridiculous, Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. She's a liar, a bitter, scorned woman trying to destroy me. He turned on Catherine. You did this? To get back at me for last night? Catherine looked him dead in the eye. The entire room held its breath. Last night was not the reason, Damien, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. It was merely the permission slip I gave myself to do what was necessary. You built this company on my intellect, my strategies and my work. And when you were done, you decided I was disposable. She gestured to the board. I am simply demonstrating my value. The value you forgot. She turned back to the stunned board members. Gentlemen, Sterling Capital's offer is on the table for the next 48 hours. It is conditional on the immediate removal of Damien Blackwood as CEO and the cessation of the Cygnus AI acquisition. Should you accept, I will be overseeing the transition as part of the new management team. I know where the bodies are buried. I also know where the treasure is. She closed her laptop. The presentation was over. Damien stood, shaking with a rage that rendered him speechless. He looked at the faces of his board, men he thought he owned, and saw not loyalty, but cold, hard calculation. He saw them looking from his trembling form to Catherine's steel composure, and he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that he had already lost. Catherine and Alexander Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a bomb of their own making to detonate behind them. The fallout from the boardroom blitz was swift and brutal. Damien's world, once an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power, began to crumble with terrifying speed. He stormed out of the boardroom after Catherine and Sterling, his mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He tried to rally his board, appealing to their loyalty, to their shared history, But it was useless. He was no longer speaking to friends. He was speaking to businessmen who had just been shown a lifeboat as their ship was taking on water. "Damien, be reasonable," Robert Chen had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The woman just proved with data that our stock is overvalued by at least 40%. Sterling is offering a premium on that inflated price. If we refuse, and this information leaks, which it inevitably will, we'll be facing shareholder lawsuits that will tie us up in court for years. She's checkmated you." His first frantic call was to Serafina. He needed her comfort, her validation, her adoration. He found her at her apartment, surrounded by packed Louis Vuitton luggage. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Are you going somewhere?" Serafina didn't look up from a box of jewelry she was sorting. "I'm going to Milan for a few weeks. A new contract," she said, her tone cool and distant. "Milan? Now? I need you here," he exclaimed. "Catherine, she's trying to destroy me. She went to Alexander Sterling." Serafina finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I heard. It's all over the financial news feeds already. Sterling Capital launches hostile takeover bid for Blackwood Innovations." She shrugged, a delicate, dismissive gesture. "It sounds messy." "Messy? It's a war. And I need you by my side. We're a power couple, remember?" A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Damien, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We were a power couple when you had power. I attached myself to a rising star, not a falling one. A CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover, with his brilliant wife leading the charge against him. That's not a good look. It's embarrassing." The word hit him harder than the slap he'd delivered to Catherine. Embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He realized with sickening clarity that he had never been more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Her affection had been a transaction, and his value had just plummeted. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, snapping the jewelry box shut. "Think of it as a strategic retreat. Call me when you've sorted out all of this." She brushed past him, her expensive perfume a final, cloying insult. He knew she would never answer his call. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. His next blow came from within his own company. He tried to lock down the company's servers to hide the evidence Catherine had presented, but it was too late. He received a call from Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I need you to initiate a digital lockdown. Erase the R&D logs from the last 6 months. Shred the quarterly variance reports." "I can't do that, Damien." Marcus's voice was firm, laced with a new kind of confidence. "What do you mean you can't? I'm still the CEO of this company. You work for me." "No, Damien, I work for the company, for the shareholders. And right now, the best thing for this company is a smooth transition of power," Marcus said. There was a pause. "I've already provided Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling's legal team with the supplementary data they requested. The server logs, the internal emails, all of it. It corroborates her entire presentation." The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that Damien couldn't even speak. Marcus, his loyal COO, the man he'd promoted and trusted for years, had turned on him. "Why, Marcus?" he finally whispered. "Because she was right," Marcus said simply. "About everything. About the flawed code, about the Cygnus deal, about you. You stopped listening a long time ago, Damien. You were going to run this company into the ground out of sheer ego. Catherine, Ms. Vance, she's saving it, and all of our jobs along with it. I'm sorry, but my loyalty is to the house she built, not to the man who was trying to burn it down. The final nail in his coffin was the media. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire CEO's wife teams with rival to seize control of empire, screamed the headlines. They painted Catherine as a wronged genius, a strategic mastermind reclaiming her legacy. They dug into her past, her academic achievements at Wharton, her early, uncredited role in the company's founding. She became a feminist icon overnight. Damien, in contrast, was portrayed as a fool and a brutish tyrant, the man who slapped his wife and lost his empire in the same week. The photo of Catherine leaving the gala, her face resolute, was plastered everywhere. The faint bruise was a symbol of his downfall. He holed up in his penthouse, the glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of his dominance, now feeling like a cage. He watched the stock ticker for Blackwood Innovations. The board, facing overwhelming pressure, had publicly announced they were entering into negotiations with Sterling Capital. The stock price, after a brief, panicked dip, had soared on the news of the acquisition and the promise of new, competent leadership. He was undone, utterly and completely. He had underestimated the woman who stood beside him for 10 years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her grace for weakness. He had thought she was an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed and, when necessary, disciplined. He never realized she was the queen, and he had just been a pawn in her long, patient game. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the final, crushing silence of defeat. The 48 hours that followed the boardroom meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and high-stakes negotiations, but the outcome was never in doubt. With Marcus Thorne's cooperation and the irrefutable data Catherine had provided, the board of Blackwood Innovations had no choice. They voted unanimously to accept Sterling Capital's offer. Damien Blackwood was officially and ignominiously terminated as CEO, forced to sell his shares as part of the deal. He was given a severance package dictated by the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had insisted upon years ago, an agreement he had laughed at the time. It protected all premarital assets and intellectual property. As she was the source of nearly all the company's foundational IP, he was left with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was just another wealthy, forgotten casualty of Wall Street. The day the deal was finalized, Catherine walked back into the headquarters of the company she had built, not as the CEO's wife, but as the new chief strategy officer and a member of the board of directors for the newly formed entity, Sterling Blackwood. The atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once averted their eyes from her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was no longer a phantom in the hallways. She was the acknowledged power. Her first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting. Standing on a stage in the building's atrium, she looked out at the hundreds of faces staring up at her. She didn't gloat. She didn't mention Damien's name. She spoke of the future. For too long, this company has chased short-term gains and fleeting headlines, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. We have prioritized image over innovation, ego over excellence. That era is over. Starting today, we are returning to the principles that once made us great: sustainable growth, fearless research, and a commitment to building technology that lasts. She laid out her vision, a clear, concise, and brilliant roadmap for the company's next 5 years. She announced the immediate cancellation of the disastrous Cygnus AI acquisition, redirecting the funds into internal R&D and promoting several talented engineers whom Damien had overlooked. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge and a clarity of purpose that left no one in doubt as to who was now in charge. Marcus Thorne, who she had promoted to president and COO, stood by her side, a look of profound respect on his face. Later that day, she met with Alexander Sterling in her new office, the very office Damien had once occupied. It was already being transformed. The cold, minimalist furniture was being replaced with warmer, more functional pieces. The ostentatious modern art was gone, replaced with whiteboards covered in strategic diagrams. "A good first day, Miss Vance," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Please call me Catherine," she replied, looking up from a budget report. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a small smile. "The markets have responded well. The analysts are calling this the most elegant corporate takeover in a decade." "It wasn't about elegance," she said, her expression serious. "It was about correction, restoring balance." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but you can't deny there's a certain poetry to it." He looked at her, his usual predatory gaze softened by something else. Admiration. "I've acquired dozens of companies in my career. It's usually a bloody, messy affair. But with you, it was like watching a surgeon at work. You didn't use a cudgel, you used a scalpel." "Damien was the architect of his own downfall," Catherine said, unwilling to take full credit for his self-destruction. "I simply pointed out the structural flaws to the demolition team." Alexander chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "A modest surgeon, then. I have a feeling this is going to be a very profitable partnership, Catherine." Their relationship remained strictly professional, yet a powerful current of mutual respect flowed between them. He valued her intellect, her foresight, her unwavering composure. She valued his decisiveness, his vast resources, and the fact that he never once underestimated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a brilliant mind, a formidable ally. For Catherine, after a decade of being treated as an accessory, that respect was more valuable than any romance. That evening, she did not return to a hotel suite. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, a place with character and warmth, filled with books and art that she loved. It was hers, bought with the first payment from her new, staggering salary and signing bonus. As she unlocked her own front door, carrying a bag of groceries, a sense of profound peace washed over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her company, she was reclaiming her life, her name, her identity. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down and reforged into a key. The new dawn wasn't just for Sterling Blackwood. It was for Catherine Vance. And it was just beginning. 6 months passed. The transition at Sterling Blackwood was not just smooth, it was transformative. Under Catherine's strategic guidance and Marcus's operational management, the company flourished. She dismantled Damien's reckless projects, stabilized the company's finances, and fostered a new culture of genuine innovation. The flawed Prometheus AI was scrapped, and a new, more stable and powerful version, codenamed Phoenix, was already in development. Built on the solid foundation of her original architectural plans, the company's stock price didn't just recover, it reached unprecedented new heights. Catherine Vance became a legend in the business world. She was the subject of a glowing cover story in Forbes magazine, titled "The Architect: How Catherine Vance Rebuilt Her Empire." The article detailed her quiet but crucial role in the founding of Blackwood Innovations and her masterful strategy in seizing control. The accompanying photograph was of her in the new boardroom, poised and powerful, with Alexander Sterling looking on with clear admiration. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Damien. He was now a footnote in her story. Her relationship with Alexander had deepened into a formidable professional partnership and a quiet, budding friendship. They were intellectual equals who challenged and respected one another. There were hints of something more, shared dinners that lasted for hours, conversations that strayed from business to art, philosophy, and their pasts. But they were in no rush. For the first time in a long time, Catherine was building something for herself, on her own terms, and she was savouring every moment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Damien Blackwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe in a quiet, forgotten corner of Soho. His world had shrunk dramatically. The sycophants and hangers-on had vanished along with his CEO title. His invitations to galas and exclusive parties had dried up. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very events he once dominated. Serafina had never called. He'd seen her once, photographed on the arm of a much older, much richer European industrialist. She hadn't even given him a second glance. He was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw it. The cover of Forbes. He stared at the image of Catherine, his Catherine, looking more regal and confident than he had ever seen her. He read the headline, "The Architect." The word twisted in his gut. He read excerpts from the article, quotes from Marcus Thorne praising her vision, from industry analysts lauding her genius, from Alexander Sterling calling her his most valuable asset. There was a small, bitter paragraph about him, describing him as the ousted founder whose aggressive but reckless leadership had nearly ruined the company. He was the villain in her heroic tale. As he sat there, a wave of cold, hard clarity washed over him. He had never truly seen her. He had seen a wife, an assistant, a reflection of his own success. He had never seen the brilliant, formidable woman who had been standing beside him all along, holding up the pillars of his kingdom. The slap had not been a show of strength. It had been an act of catastrophic weakness, the desperate lashing out of an insecure man terrified of the power his wife quietly wielded. He looked up from his phone just as a black town car pulled up to the curb across the street. The rear door opened and Catherine stepped out, followed by Alexander Sterling. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. They were heading into a renowned art gallery. She looked radiant, energized, free. She didn't see him. He was invisible to her now, a ghost from a past life she had shed completely. He watched as Alexander held the gallery door open for her, the gesture one of casual, genuine respect. As she passed through the doorway, she turned and gave him a smile, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for a decade as Mrs. Blackwood, but a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. Damien felt a profound, aching emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the realization of what he had truly lost. He hadn't just lost a company. He had thrown away the one person who had seen greatness in him and had dedicated her own genius to making it a reality. He had shattered the most valuable thing he ever had, not with a single slap, but with 1,000 cuts of ego and neglect. He was left with his diminished fortune and his cavernous, empty penthouse. She had the company, the respect of her peers, and a future she was building for herself. The final reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation or a shouted argument. It was this, a quiet, undeniable truth settling upon him in a lonely cafe. He had slapped his wife to please his mistress, and the next day she had arrived with an army and calmly, methodically, taken back the world she had built, and he had no one to blame but himself. And so, Catherine Vance's story becomes a powerful lesson in value, respect, and the quiet strength that so many people underestimate. It's a reminder that the silent partner in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength isn't about raising your voice or your hand, but about knowing your worth and having the courage to claim it. Damien Blackwood thought he was breaking his wife, but he only succeeded in breaking the chains that held back a titan. She didn't seek simple revenge. She sought reclamation, building a brighter future from the ashes of a painful past. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation? Was her boardroom takeover the ultimate power move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And of course, for more compelling stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.